The psychology behind myth and folklore is pretty much the same across all cultures. They act as warnings to us about our behavior, and they are told to wide-eyed children as a means of shaping good behavior. They also reflect the physical environment as a way of explaining or personifying natural phenomena. Native American culture has a rich folklore tradition. Many of their stories are focused on animals and nature. Thus, their most frightening stories have a strong element of the natural world weaved throughout them. The various Native American tribes each have their own unique tales, with some sharing similar chilling stories of bizarre creatures that are deadly to humans. Welcome to Intrigued Mind, where today we explore our favorite creepy Native American folklore tales. You will see a common thread running throughout each of them, an emphasis on the natural world and the darker parts of the human heart. Our first creature of woe comes to us from the Anishinaabe tradition and is named the Bangkok. According to the interrelated tribes of the Anishinaabe, the Bangkok is a horrifying creature that terrorizes the Great Lakes of America. The Bangkok is death personified. It presents as a skeleton draped in translucent skin with glowing red eyes, and it emits a shrill scream as it flies through the forests. And although it is dressed in hunter's clothing, this terrifying creature does have the ability to make itself invisible when hunting its human prey. Despite its skeletal frame, the Bangkok possesses unnatural strength that it uses to dominate its human victims. Now, if you're not a warrior, then you're safe from the Bangkok. However, if you are a warrior, then beware. The Bangkok stealthily and silently hunts sleeping warriors. When it finds them, it cuts open their stomach so skillfully that the warrior does not even wake. The Bangkok then removes part of the victim's organs and devours it. If the unfortunate warrior is awake during this attack, then the Bangkok subdues them by beating them with a club or shooting them with arrows. Once their victim is in a state of paralysis, the Bangkok eats their liver. Yet, a Bangkok's hunger is never, ever satisfied. Bet you're glad you're not a Native American warrior, right? And speaking of warriors, the Bangkok is actually the spirit of a dead warrior whose bones were scattered in a lake after they had died a dishonorable death, usually after committing an unspeakable crime. The only way to beat this creepy entity is to recover its bones and lay them to rest in a proper burial ceremony. Our next depraved monster of Native American origin is named Thelechuza. Thelechuza is a creepy folklore tale of the native peoples of Mexico and Texas. Appearing as a human woman during the daylight hours, then shifting into a giant woman-owl hybrid at night, Thelechuza will lure in her prey by mimicking the sounds of a crying infant. When their hapless victims look for the child, Thelechuza swoops down from her tree to carry off her victim to somewhere quiet where she can eat them alive. According to the folklore surrounding this creature, this once human woman traded her soul for magical powers, or was murdered and became this monstrous creature in order to exact revenge. Either way, there are clear parallels between this myth and that of the harpy of ancient Greek mythology, which is a creature that is half woman and half bird, which lures its victims to their deaths with her song. There are also links between this story and with the very Christian notion of bartering one's soul in a pact with the devil. So, dear viewer, if you happen to be driving along a desolate road in Texas in the black of night and you hear the gentle cries of a small child, perhaps it is best to keep driving. And if you do happen to encounter this witch-like monster, then hopefully you have some salt with you. The Thelechuza, whilst immune to weapons, is not immune to salt. You must throw it directly into her face. She will also flee if you swear at her. Our next creepy Native American story comes to us from the Cree people of Canada. Meet the Managi, or the Little People. These ugly little creeps have disproportionately large, bulbous heads with no hair, faces with large round eyes, and long, skinny arms and legs. Their skin is gray in color, and they stand between 3 and 4 feet tall. If you are picturing an alien at this point in time, you are not alone. The Managi can be distinguished from visitors from outer space by their fingers. They have 12 in total, and their nose and mouth, in that they possess neither. According to this folktale, the Managi are tricksters who dwell in spaces between rocks and rapids. There, they lie in wait for unsuspecting travelers in canoes, then rush out and capsize the boats, spinning them around in the water and thus ensuring the watery deaths of the occupants. According to the Cree, these vile little creatures take great delight at killing people in this manner. Beware, you will not be able to spy a Managi. that is, unless you are a child or a medicine man or woman. According to this myth, the safest way to not incite the wrath of these tricksters is to show your respect when you visit the places that they are said to inhabit. One fascinating creature, which appears as half fox and half snake, is known as the Enguru Viru. This creepy folklore story belongs to the Mapuche people of Chile. It has a long body and tail, and fingernails that it uses like claws. Rather revoltingly, the Enguru Viru also has fingernails attached to its tail, which it uses like an extra leg. And like the Managi, the Enguru Viru lurks in the water, awaiting its victims. These river dwellers use their powers to make the water shallow, thus tricking humans into thinking that the low water is safe enough to cross. Once these unwitting victims have stepped into the waters, the Enguru Viru creates a whirlpool that sucks them down into the deep where they drown. If you ever must cross a river where you suspect one of these merciless beasts resides, your best bet is to engage the services of a shaman, who will hold it at bay with a long, sharp knife, long enough to allow people to cross from one side of the river to the other. Afterwards, the Enguru Viru will be so put out that it will head downriver in search of other unfortunate victims that it can lure to their watery graves. Our last creepy creature from Native American folklore is the Wendigo. Also known as the Wendigo, this frightening entity is a part of the Algonquian, Ojibwe, Eastern Cree, Saulteaux, Westmain Swampy Cree, Naskapi, and Innu people's tradition. The Wendigo makes drowning luckless humans look pretty tame. This monster, which takes the form of a deformed ice giant, is associated with all of the vilest of human behaviors: greed, murder, and cannibalism. They are associated with the cold northern winter and the starvation that it can bring. The Algonquian described the Wendigo as a giant with a heart of ice. Sometimes it is thought to be entirely made of ice. Its body is skeletal and deformed, with missing lips and toes. The Ojibwe speak of its jagged teeth, its bloodied footprints, and the strange hissing sound that it makes. The Wendigo is continually ravenous for human flesh, and its gluttony can never be sated. This creepy creature reeks of corrupted flesh, death, and decay. According to the folklore surrounding this beast, when a human eats the flesh of another human, then a Wendigo is created. Terrifyingly, they can possess the body of a man, who will then proceed to eat the men, women, and children whom they once loved. Stories like that of the Wendigo have been used by Native Americans for time immemorial to teach people important lessons. In this instance, the Wendigo acts as a stark warning against the act of cannibalism, and thus encourages sharing and cooperation amongst people who inhabit cold and inhospitable regions in order for the group to survive. Stories like that of the Bangkok act as a deterrent to people against acts that are taboo, fratricide for example. Many Native American folk stories have elements that are immediately recognizable to the Western mind. For example, European settlers likened the Wendigo to werewolves, to the point that depictions of the Wendigo post-European settlement looked like a human-animal hybrid rather than as a humanoid ice giant. According to Tiffany Midge, who is a poet and Standing Rock Sioux member, monster stories may hold very different associations in Native stories. In some traditions, the different monsters are deities, but there's certainly a great many so-called horror elements to a great many different Native legends. But imposing Western interpretations on them flattens and diminishes them to some extent. Miss Midge is right. It is a consistent theme throughout the history of Christianity to try and mold indigenous stories to fit a Christian narrative. Yet the moral lessons of these adaptations mean that the true essence of these horror stories is lost. But what is also notable is that certain acts, such as cannibalism, is taboo across many different cultures and societies. Regardless of what you take from these frightful folklore tales in terms of meaning, it cannot be doubted that they are all creepy as heck. Which creepy Native American folktales would you add to this list? For more videos on the most amazing forgotten parts of our history, be sure to subscribe to the Intrigued Mind channel, like the video, and leave your suggestions in the comments below.